Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. In our ongoing series about AI, today we are going to talk about AI's Hippocratic Oath with Professor Chinmayi Sharma. Professor Chinmayi Sharma is faculty at Fordham Law School in New York, where she specializes in open internet governance, cybersecurity, AI accountability, and related fields. Professor Sharma is also a cybersecurity and technology fellow at the Strauss Center and a non-resident scholar with both the Center for Democracy and Technology and the Atlantic Council. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks, ma'am.
You so much. I'm very excited to be here.
So conventionally, the Hippocratic Oath has been an oath of ethics taken by physicians. How is it relevant to the context of AI?
So the Hippocratic Oath is not actually a legally binding oath that physicians take, but more a general principle that underlies how medical education is given and how we evaluate the technical competency and ethics of a doctor. And so really it's a cultural thing about the profession. And my paper argues that that same cultural principle can and should be extended to AI engineers as well. So the Hippocratic Oath is just something that most people are familiar with, but professions like civil engineering, law also have similar ethical standards where in law, you are supposed to act in the client's best interest. For engineering, there's a minimum degree of kind of competency that you're supposed to provide. You can't kind of cut corners to the detriment of the safety of what you're building. So I think that to the extent that it's relevant, it's the idea that certain professions, we just allow capitalism and contracts to dictate how people behave. But for other professions, we have a higher ethical standard for them, and we expect them to think about the impact of their work on individuals and society. And I think that given the importance of AI and its complexity, we should have AI engineers also be thinking about the impact of their work on individuals and society.
In your paper, you have argued that at the heart of the problem is not the technology, but the creators and the AI engineering process. What leads you to this conclusion?
So I think that when people talk about AI, they often say things like the technology is harmful, the technology is bad, or they'll talk about how we need to evaluate whether a product is good or a product is bad. I think focusing on the technology too much limits the scope of options we have for how we are going to take care of the AI and harmful AI. Whereas if we focus on the professionals that are building it, that gives us an opportunity to say, is this about the technology itself, or is it about the incentives that are given to engineers when they're building this? So for example, AI is a technology that can be built in very expensive, complex ways or in very cheap, rudimentary ways. If you have a business structure where there are limited fundings and a lot of pressure to release a product quickly, you might have people that are cutting corners and building something cheaply and releasing it very fast and increasing the chance that it is unsafe. But that's not an issue with the technology. That's an issue with the incentives that were given to engineers. And so I think that this is why I think that we need to focus more on who is building AI and not about the hypothetical technology itself.
Present solutions for AI harms fall under two categories: substantive regulations and legal liability. But you have said that these solutions are inadequate. How do you believe that these approaches fall short, and what are the limitations of traditional methods in addressing AI-related issues?
When we think about litigation, a core premise to litigation is the idea that the harm has to already have happened before we can bring some kind of lawsuit, whether it is something that the government brings or a private actor brings against another private actor. So that feels a little too late in the process. We don't want to wait for these harms to happen, especially because given the scope and reach of AI, if the harm has already happened to one person, chances are the harm has happened to countless people. And so the goal is to avoid that, not wait for it to happen and then try to fix it. The second reason is if we wait for the harm to happen and try to fix it, it's actually very difficult to kind of revert back to different versions of AI. Once AI has been advanced to a certain point, it's hard to teach it to unlearn certain behavior or forget certain kinds of information. And so basically the way the product is that caused harm, it's going to end up staying that way. And chances are when something exists, we have a hard time making the decision, oh, this has to go away forever. And what that means is even if it causes harm, we're going to try to find excuses or justifications that this still is overall beneficial for society. And that means that we are not forcing people to, at the beginning of the development process, be more careful. Another limitation on litigation is the fact that the way AI harms happen, sometimes the individual doesn't realize that they have been harmed. So for example, influence campaigns are very sophisticated. And what they involve is somebody trying to manipulate somebody else's thoughts or beliefs through subtle communication strategies. And so if this is something that AI is being used or for example, an AI, like a ChatGPT version, is trying to convince people in the public that they should not vote in the election, the public doesn't know that they're being manipulated. They just think that, oh, this is a really interesting point that this bot is making, and it ends up influencing a large number of people. And so if you don't know that you've been manipulated, you can't bring a lawsuit for that. Another issue is in litigation, it is often the burden on the person who's bringing the lawsuit to prove that it was the defendant, whoever they're suing, that caused them harm. But with AI, it's hard to show that this AI is what caused you specifically the harm. We know that it is capable of causing harm generally, but to provide sufficient evidence that ties that AI to what happened to you can be difficult. Like, for example, there's a lot of concern about mental health and physical health concerns with minors. Eating disorders are very rampant, especially in younger populations. And they often use AI tools to learn new methods of kind of manifesting their eating disorders. And so to prove that AI is making their physical health worse by teaching them how to either restrict food intake or anything else, the defendant's just going to say, well, you've been doing this even before you started talking to AI. How can you prove that the AI is what caused your harm, even though we know instinctively that they must have played some role? And then regulation is generally anticipatory. It's trying to anticipate things that are going to happen in the future and to create requirements or restrictions around it. But while I think regulation is very, very important, regardless of which government we are talking about, it is relatively slow for the government to be able to draft something, get enough agreement on it, put it into place, have the ability to start enforcing it. This is challenging because the government tends to not have a lot of technical expertise. They tend to not have a lot of resources. And so they can't enforce it against all companies. They have to pick and choose which ones they are going to enforce it against. Sometimes they are basing their assumptions on the technology today, but in 5 years, the technology could be so different that it's no longer, their assumptions are no longer relevant. Like 5 years ago, there was a small portion of the population that knew that generative AI was on the horizon, but the average person wasn't thinking about generative AI until OpenAI released ChatGPT. And then this kind of new era of generative AI everywhere exists. But if we had passed an AI bill in 2018, chances are it wouldn't have anticipated the way that it's being used today. So that's why I think that both of those avenues are a little limited.
You discussed the idea of implementing ex-ante controls before AI development begins. Don't you think that such ex-ante regulation would stifle regulations?
People often laugh at me when I say this because I say it to be provocative, but I also do believe it. I think that innovation is an overrated principle today. And the reason I say that is not because innovation is not a good thing, but we have now put innovation on such a pedestal that it now trumps all other values that we have because we are so scared of slowing down the pace of innovation. And obviously that push comes from a generally capitalistic mindset of we want to continue advancing technology to maintain competitive advantage and to meet supply and demand and things like that. But innovation is different from discovery or research. Ex-ante restrictions does not prevent people from in labs exploring what's possible, pushing the boundaries of something. Just because the FDA only approves in the US certain kinds of medications or procedures doesn't mean that there aren't physicians and researchers all over the world that are trying to figure out the next generation of interventions. But the way we talk about innovation, we are mixing research and discovery and advancement with commercialization. So ex-ante regulations aren't stopping us from exploring what AI can do. They're saying you can't now expose this to the public and gain profit from it. And I think that that is something that we should, I absolutely think is a risk that we need to take, because right now we have companies that have released products that are available to the public that might be theoretically innovative, but are relatively untested, and they are impacting a vulnerable population, which is like certainly women, gender non-conforming individuals, minorities, people of lower socioeconomic classes, all of that. But just the average person doesn't know about AI well enough to protect themselves against it. So when you release, for example, AI therapist, and that's pretty untested, yes, you're innovating at the boundary of what AI can do. You're like, AI can provide mental health. But I don't think that the technology is ready to be released to the public yet. And then you actually have therapists that have started kind of influencing their patients in harmful ways.
Do AI engineers currently possess the necessary skills and training to handle sensitive data sets, such as those containing racial slurs? Do they have the necessary abilities to balance the need to filter harmful content with also the need to preserve marginalized voices? How should they deal with such ethical challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess the short answer is no, I don't think they have the training at the moment. However, I think that there are a lot of professionals who deal with the same kind of complexities that also don't have sufficient training to handle them well. Today, for example, we are still trying to figure out how do we train educators to balance these very complex social dynamics and sensitive information while doing their jobs. But I think that in my research, talking to a lot of AI engineers at companies, a lot of them are aware that there are ethical issues. So it's not that they don't care. I think it's that they haven't been given the tools and information to know what to do about it. And we've done this in other professions. And people will say, yeah, but we're not very good at doing this. And their examples would be, for example, everyone hates lawyers. They say lawyers are dishonest and manipulative, and there is definitely truth to that. But at a baseline, there are certain obligations that I, as an attorney, have. And if I don't meet those obligations, I can be sued or disbarred. For example, Rudy Giuliani was famously disbarred in DC, in American courts, for his unethical behavior. And so that can happen. And so we do have those kinds of reforms. And it means that in law school, I take classes about how do I balance serving my client versus being honest to the judge. So for example, my client asks me to lie, but I have a duty of honesty to the judge. Like, how do you balance that? And so we could be doing better, but those classes exist. And right now, very, very few engineering programs have ethics classes. So we can be doing something. But on top of that, I think that there's also we need to have a change in the way that development happens within companies. So I wrote with like a friend and colleague, Stephen Kelt, who's an AI ethics professor at Princeton, about how agile development is inconsistent with AI responsibility, or at least there's some tension there. So at companies, as an engineer, you're asked to build a specific feature and build it as quickly as you can. And the agile process is basically the way you are trying to maximize efficiency. Like, how can you build this out as quick as possible? And so it involves like lots of teams kind of doing work simultaneously, doing it without needing to like constantly go back and check with somebody whether or not you're doing the right thing. It's all meant to like improve speed. But what that means is that people aren't really documenting what they're doing. They're not really bringing in outside consultants. They're not checking constantly with the customer or the user, like, oh, is this what you actually wanted? And if you want ethical AI, if you want engineers to be able to balance all of these various considerations, I think that you need to slow down the development process and have individuals that are trained ethicists, trained with these specific issues. Like, for example, how do you anticipate a tool being used in a discriminatory way, and have them capable of talking to the engineers to figure out, what does red teaming look like? At what stage should we be doing this kind of testing? How do we document these considerations? How do you get feedback from your users to see whether they're experiencing certain things? So anyway, it's like we need to change kind of the way these teams are structured and how fast they work.
You propose professionalizing AI engineering as a solution to mitigating AI harms. What does this entail, and how would such an approach help in reducing the negative impacts of AI? Also, what advantages would it offer?
When I say professionalizing engineers, what I really mean is two things. There's like a procedural aspect and then a substantive or cultural change. The procedural aspect is you would require engineers to get a license. And that means that I cannot go build AI products at a university or a hospital or Google without getting a license first. The same way that lawyers, doctors, civil engineers, accountants, they all have licenses they have to get. They have tests that they have to take. They have to pass these tests. They have to show certain kind of like, I am an ethical person. I have references that can vouch for me. I have finished my certain like requisite education, and now I have this license. And with the license also comes certain obligations of, if you are an accountant, you need to do accounting in the approved ways. So in the use, we have the generally accepted accounting principles. And what those are kind of like technical standards of, this is how you do accounting in a way that the experts in the space have decided is the best, most accurate way to capture this information. If you don't do that, if you cut corners, or if you kind of fudge some numbers, you are going to be liable for malpractice. So there's a whole kind of, you are making sure that the only people who enter the field are the people who are qualified. And then after they enter the field, you're making sure that they're still acting in line with best practices. And so like you need to have kind of disciplinary tribunals where I can send a complaint that, oh, for example, I noticed that my doctor had alcohol on his breath when he was uh, evaluating me. And so I can file a complaint. I can sue that person in court, but I can also file a complaint to the board of medical professionals and say, I would like you to investigate this. I think that this is malpractice. And so those are two different ways that you can hold this person accountable for not being a professional. But the second thing is like a cultural change where with formalizing a profession, you like that things that come with the formal education, exams, renewing your licenses, so taking more exams, going to conferences, there is a cultural change that happens where you take pride in your profession in a different way. You want to maintain the integrity of your profession. You hold yourself to a higher standard. You have an intrinsic desire to be using the best science that's available to you. It becomes less about directly serving your employer and more about kind of serving the public. And benefits of this over the existing system is, for example, in the medical profession, if I have discovered a new surgical technique that could save lives, I can go get a patent on it, but I am not allowed to prevent other physicians or hospitals from using that technique to save lives. Because the profession said, like, there are certain things that are more important than your ability to make money off of your discoveries. If you've discovered something that can save lives, that is available for all other medical professionals to use. If you take that example and you apply it in the AI context today, the head AI engineers at one company cannot talk to engineers at another company and say, wow, we discovered this really great way for us to anticipate harmful uses of our AI, or we've discovered this really great way to really strongly preserve the privacy of our users, because all of that information is a competitive advantage today to the company that they work for. So that would be sharing confidential information with a competitor. But if there was kind of a culture of professionalism, then that kind of information would be like publishable and something that you share and becomes a best practice in the field, and then gets enshrined in kind of like a book or kind of a guidelines for how engineers should behave. And that is taken out of like the competitive domain and made, this is publicly available knowledge that everyone deserves to have.
What potential risks or challenges do you foresee with the professionalization of AI engineers, and how might these be addressed?
Yeah, that's absolutely, I agree with that evaluation. So to the fact that companies are not going to like this, I think one of the advantages of professionalization is we don't care about the companies. We care about the individual engineer that works for companies. They get the license, not the company. If we gave companies licenses, they would 100% find ways to use that to keep out competitors, make it really hard to get the license so that a small startup can't join. But for example, when a doctor has a license and has knowledge that, oh, my hospital administrators want me to see 30 patients in a day, but if I see that 30 patients, I can't do the bare minimum amount of stuff that I need to do to serve these patients. The doctor can then push back and say, you're asking me to commit malpractice. I can't do that. So the employer like loses power because there's this external legally enforceable thing that's more important, which is technical standards. So today, if I'm an AI engineer and I don't like what my employer is doing, I can complain, but then nothing might happen from that. And then what we have to do is wait for somebody to get hurt and then have them sue. Whereas if I had a license and I was an AI engineer and they asked me to do something that was really irresponsible, I could say, you're asking me to commit malpractice and I legally cannot do that. And they could report this behavior if they kind of have that license and power to do that. Another thing, though, that could be concerning is professionals have used licensing boards in anti-competitive ways. So, for example, dentists are famous for this. They get licenses, and then the boards that decide who gets a license and who doesn't are made up by dentists. And so they want to make sure not too many people get a license because then they can't charge as much for what they do. They want to say that, oh, for example, technology came out where I can do teeth whitening at home. And the dentists are like, nope, you have to do that under the supervision of a dentist because that would preserve their ability to work. So the risk here is that the professionals use this to maintain their ability to keep it scarce. So like not enough AI engineers are out there, so I can demand a lot more money, or lower the standards for themselves. Like, oh, you don't have to, go above and beyond. Like, you are not liable for malpractice as long as you do like the bare minimum stuff. But the way I think that you can address that is having licensing boards that are made up not just of professionals who are practicing in the field. So if you had a licensing board for AI engineering that had, yes, some AI engineers, but if they have engineers, those are engineers that are not allowed to be simultaneously working for a for-profit company. You could also have on this team academics or people from civil society or nonprofits. You could have also on this team different kinds of like people who represent users. So somebody who can give the perspective of like parents of children, like leaders of a minority community, advocates for kind of other oppressed populations. Then having multiple voices on the licensing board makes it less likely that just the professionals can be using this to benefit themselves financially.
Thank you.